So first of all, I would like to thank all of you for showing up here. I know how precious your time is, and to be honest, I'm really honored to have such a huge crowd. I want to thank everyone who made it possible for this debate to happen. Now into today's debate. Now, tonight's motion states that in the aftermath of a genocide, forgiveness is more important than justice. So I would like to begin by setting the ground for this debate tonight. So first of all, I think having been in the United States for the past 8 weeks, we've seen a big cultural difference. And there's a big cultural difference between the American culture and our culture. So apart from the things that we find weird that you guys do, such as walking fast and what is supposed to be a nice walk at the park ends up feeling like a gym session, or the fact that you're all governed by time and the need to always be on time. One of the differences which I think is important to acknowledge tonight, because it would create the frames through which we should understand the debate, is that Americans are very individualistic and the rest of the world is very collectivist. Now, Triandis, a researcher, defined individualism and collectivism using 4 main characteristics. Now, individualism is defined as a social pattern consisting of loosely linked individuals who, number 1, see themselves as relatively independent from the collective in which they're members. Number 2, they're motivated primarily by their own preferences, needs, rights, or contracts they have made with others. Number 3, they place more importance on personal than collective goals. And number 4, they tend to make decisions on whether to associate with others on an analysis of costs and benefits to the individual. Collectivism, in contrast, is defined as a social pattern consisting of closely linked individuals who number 1, see themselves as connected with the collective in which they're members. Number 2, they are motivated primarily by the social norms and the duties of their collective. Number 3, they place more importance on collective goals than their own personal goals. And lastly, they emphasize their connectedness to the other members of the collective. Tonight, we're debating about an important topic, which is the genocide. So the affirmative would like to begin by saying that it would be impossible to examine the issues related to genocide without using a collectivist worldview. According to the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, 1948, genocide is the systematic killing of a large group of people based on their racial, religious, ethnic group with the intention of exterminating them. So at its core, genocide is a collective act where people kill another group in the name of their group. So if we're going to talk about solutions to the issue of genocide and what should be done in its aftermath, we should do that by using the collectivist worldview. As the affirmative would like to begin by acknowledging the importance of justice in holding killers accountable and making sure the culture of impunity is ended. However, we do believe that forgiveness, and more specifically collectivist forgiveness, has a greater importance in helping the nation heal from its tragic past and stopping the reoccurrence of mass killings. We will also define the aftermath of a genocide as the generation after the genocide, and if we were to put a number, we'd just say 50 years. So before I proceed, I would just like all of us to ask ourselves one question. What is the main goal a nation wants to achieve right after a genocide? So as the affirmative team today will suggest that the main goal that every society that has undergone through the genocide must aspire to is to build peace and to prevent the reoccurrence of genocide. So genocide researchers Gregory Stanton and Irving Staub suggest that a society that has gone under genocide is vulnerable to the relapse within our generations if the conditions that led to the genocide are not properly addressed. So the team that should take tonight's debate, dear judges, is the team that provides greater social cohesion between the enemy groups. Now, I'll go into my arguments. In his research entitled Collectivism, Forgiveness, and Social Harmony, Joshua Hook, a professor from the Virginia Commonwealth University, defined collectivist forgiveness as a decision to forgive that is motivated by maintaining social harmony and occurs within a context that values reconciliation and national repair. Collectivist forgiveness focuses on a decision to forgive that is primarily motivated by a desire to maintain social harmony rather than a desire to regulate personal emotions. So the author views forgiveness as involving 2 related but distinct processes. Under this, he defines decisional forgiveness, which is a behavior intention to reduce negative behavior towards the offender, and if possible and appropriate, restore positive behavior towards the offender. One can make a sincere decision to forgive, yet Be still emotionally unforgiving towards the offender. Be still angry or resentful or hurt. And 2, an emotional forgiveness is the internal experience of replacing negative emotions with positive emotions. Individuals with a collectivist worldview may view forgiveness as a prescribed duty that does not necessarily imply personal emotional change and will thus generally exhibit more decisional forgiveness than emotional forgiveness. Now on to the first argument as to why we believe today that forgiveness is more important than justice in the aftermath of the genocide. We believe that the number one reason is that forgiveness puts an end on revenge killings. Genocide is an issue that has affected the world all over. Only in the 20th century alone, more than 100 million people were killed in Cambodia, Armenia, Nazi Germany, Darfur, Bosnia, and Rwanda, where we come from. All the above-mentioned cases of genocide left millions of orphans and widows homeless, emotionally and mentally affected, financially weak, and also physically injured. With all those harms inflicted to them, it is only logical that the number one thing victims want to do right after a genocide is to revenge. They need to inflict the same pain to their perpetrators as a way of easing the pain that they already feel, which is the reason as to why we believe that forgiveness, in this case, minimizes the risks of revenge killing. Now, a justice, both retributive and restorative, cannot change the victim's envy to take revenge, since we're talking about genocide crimes, which imply that the victim has lost those that are dear to them. When we talk about genocide, most people tend to view it as numbers, but a genocide is about people and people that have lost those that they love. So after genocide, victims are left with deep unhealed wounds. Unless the victims deliberately take the decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance towards a person or group of people that have harmed them, they are most likely to take revenge as a way of compensating for their pain if given the right circumstances to do so. And the causes of genocide is unhealed wounds from past victimization. And history shows us time and time again that victims tend to turn into perpetrators if they do not heal from their wounds, which is why we believe that in this case, forgiveness becomes important. Then number 2, we believe the second argument that we're going to make tonight is that forgiveness helps in restoring social cohesion, as we've mentioned. After a genocide, whether we want it or not, life has to carry on. Our second priority after genocide should be to restore unity among people, and again, forgiveness is just a better way to achieve this than justice because of the few following reasons. Number 1, forgiveness enables the victim to tolerate the oppressor's presence, and that of those who come from the same group as the oppressor, because as we've mentioned, genocide is an act carried out in the name of a group, making it possible for them to work and live together, thus rebuilding the country, while justice does not exactly advocate for tolerance. While justice focuses on either punishing the oppressor or getting them to pay for what they damaged, forgiveness works on the health of the inner person of both the victim, so they release feelings of resentment toward a person or group who has harmed them and the oppressor. And on the other side, forgiveness also allows the oppressor to feel less guilty and less ashamed, thus allowing them to be able to participate in the development of the community. Therefore, forgiveness also decreases in the sense that the post-traumatic stress, and they can begin the process of healing, and so they can start working together, in which in the end results in social development. With all those arguments given, we believe that forgiveness is better than justice because forgiveness best achieves the main goal that a nation wants to achieve after a genocide, which is to build social cohesion and to be able to make sure the genocide does not happen again. Thank you.
You made the assumption that Americans are more individualistic and the advocacy that you're providing us is more collective. So if our side brings a case that is holistically collective and then more collective than yours, would you argue that the judges should prefer our advocacy?
As the affirmative side, we just decided that the team that should win is a team that best provides a model that will help genocide not to occur again and to restore social cohesion. So if you're able to do that, I believe you have the ultimate right. So we're going to wait for your case to come up and see.
For quick clarification, when you say that Americans are individualistic, you provide 4 qualifiers for that. What's the first and the last one of those qualifiers?
Hold on a second, I'll get to you. The first one is that they see themselves as relatively independent from the collective in which they're members. And the last one is they tend to make decisions on whether to associate with others on an analysis of costs and benefits to the individual.
Okay.
Do you have any examples of revenge killings in your advocacy?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in Rwanda in 1959, a group of Tutsis was forced to flee out of the country. And then when the Hutu government came into power, the Hutus decided to revenge from the Tutsis, which is one of the reasons as to why the 1994 genocide happened. I believe if they had moved on and if they had healed their wounds, the genocide probably wouldn't have happened. But because of how resentful they were towards the Tutsis, the genocide happened. So that was one. And it was a great revenge killing. Oof.
How can you ensure that individuals truly forgive? How do you weigh that?
Okay. So there is no standard way of measuring if an individual forgives, but there is a way in which we can see that a society has forgiven. I mean, we can measure collective forgiveness in the sense that if people are now able to come up together and work together, if two enemy groups can associate together, engage with one another, despite the fact that they have not forgotten, then there we can see that forgiveness is working in a way just like something that is happening in Rwanda and to most of all the other parts where genocide has happened.
And you believe that justice punishes?
I do believe that justice punishes, and I've acknowledged that. However, we do believe that right after genocide, forgiveness is more important than justice. We do not undermine the benefits of justice in holding killers accountable and restoring things for people, but we do believe that the main thing people need to work on after genocide is their moral consciousness and their inner them, because that's what is more affected more than any other thing. Because the loss of a person is far more important than the loss of a property.
Okay, that's done.
Again, I want to extend a few thank yous, mostly the same as my opponents, but specifically, I would like to say thank you for the rest of my team for being so supportive. We love you guys. Thank you so much to my coach for giving me a strong foundation debate. Thank you so much for all of you coming out to witness this debate tonight. And thank you so much for our competitors for traveling such a long way to come be with us. And really excited to open the negative side of the debate. So do that now. In the case of genocide, everything that a generation built up can be destroyed in a day or two, often by the same generation that built it. The wild beast of what mankind can become has not died. It proves itself a patient survivor, waiting in the long grass of history for the perfect moment to pounce, says Peter Moss, American journalist and author on genocide. And it is with the recognition that all of us have the makings to become genocidal that we negate the resolution and promote justice as a means to curtail future genocide. As for definitions, we are not going to contest our opponent's definition of the word genocide, but rather, we are going to provide a background on how we even arrived at having the word genocide to describe these mass killings in the first place. In 1944, Raphael Lemkin, a lawyer of Polish and Jewish descent, brought the term genocide before the United Nations in order to define this concept of systematic killing in a way that we can all viscerally understand. This very word was brought before the UN with the intent to hold the perpetrators of the genocide accountable for their actions. Therefore, the discussion on genocide, literally the word, is rooted in the pursuit of justice. The ideal of justice is far more than just law and crimes and criminals. Justice ought to be analyzed through the lens of contextualism. According to David Miller of the University of Oxford, principles of justice are context-specific rather than invariant across contexts. Therefore, within the context of genocide, people have been deprived of their freedom, of their opportunities, of their resources, and of their lives. Thus, we appeal to justice to right these wrongs, and in the aftermath of genocide, we appeal to resolve such deprivations by determining what each person is due or intrinsically entitled to have. In fact, comprehensively applied, we can see a relationship between justice and forgiveness. And if the goal of justice is to restore what was once a right relationship, then forgiveness cannot be contrary to justice, but rather reflective of it. Justice is the agent that facilitates effective forgiveness and reconciliation to the point that it must be our first priority. It is my intent to prove this fact through my two main points, which will analyze first, successful forgiveness and reconciliation through the exercise of justice as a prerequisite, and second, when a proper foundation of justice has been laid, true forgiveness, or has not been laid, excuse me, true forgiveness cannot happen, and subjugation continues. My first point, proactive justice. We will define proactive justice according to Black's Law Dictionary as the system of measures taken from a government or group with reference to the direct prevention of crime. A context-specific example we can see of proactive justice are laws regarding hate speech. Hate speech laws protect whole groups against rhetoric that could incite violence against them. And in fact, several countries with histories of genocide have hate speech laws to protect the dominant group from using this rhetoric and creating the societal conditions for genocide to prevail. Some of these countries include the United States, the United Kingdom, Japan, Sweden, Ireland, India, Canada, and even Rwanda. Rwanda adopted laws banning genocidal ideology and hate speech as a way to further deter genocide. The government's National Unity and Reconciliation Commission has released a reconciliation barometer, which considers multiple factors to determine how well people are living together. In 2015, the commission deemed reconciliation in Rwanda was at 92.5%. This shows the inextricable link between justice and forgiveness by displaying that forgiveness is possible with the right laws behind it. Reconciliation rates reaching 92.5% were facilitated through laws such as those protecting against hate speech that are specifically proactive in nature. My second point, incomplete justice. When justice is misapplied, and a proper foundation for justice has not been laid, true forgiveness cannot be achieved. In fact, this only leads to the victim's pseudo-forgiveness, which is then used as a tool of subjugation by oppressive structures. Case in point, the United States itself. Extending forgiveness without a strong foundation in justice dates back to the Civil War. In 1865, President Andrew Johnson extended blanket forgiveness to the Confederates after watching them try to physically rip the United States apart. And after this genocide of Black Americans, these forgiven former Confederates silently entered into positions of this shapes policy. This worldview is what created systems of disenfranchisement, corrupt criminal justice systems, guaranteed inferior education for Black students, and more. The continued subjugation of Black Americans is the direct result of blanket forgiveness without justice. And I say all of this to give you a comprehensive explanation of two ideas we presented earlier. The first is that forgiveness without justice results in more subjugation, as shown by a result of blanket forgiveness after the Civil War. And two, that proper foundation in justice is necessary for true forgiveness, truth, and reconciliation. We give you the example of failures of U.S. law leading to pseudo-forgiveness and continual conflict. Let's move over to my opponent's case. First, they tell us that we ought to prioritize collective forgiveness, and we say that we should be collective within this round, and we are. Simply talking about justice, we give you the example in the United States that collective forgiveness looks a lot like subjugation without good justice in place. So we tell you that we are collectivist and that we're discussing justice as it relates to whole entire societies and whole entire groups of people. We are already collectivists there. We're breaking down justice, and in the U.S. we speak about generations of Black Americans after the genocide of slaves. So we can see a generational extension of this collectivist idea here. They tell us that forgiveness puts an end to revenge killings, but actually we stop them through justice. We stop them because we facilitate the arbitration that's needed to achieve justice, which ensures protection. Rwanda is a great example of this. They also give us that justice does not lead to tolerance, and we totally agree. Some ideas and some ideology does not deserve tolerance. We've seen what happens when we extend tolerance to racist ideology in the United States. And there I rest.
3 minutes cross-examination.
Oh, you need it? No problem.
What do you qualify as hate speech after a genocide?
define hate speech.
From who?
We would define hate speech as that speech that could incite violence and that speech that could create the societal conditions for another genocide to happen.
My other question is, how does justice look like to you? And then what happens, how do you make a perpetrator, how do you hold them accountable within the justice that you're suggesting?
Well, so the first example we give you is the creation of the term genocide. Conversations about a very specific type of very sinister mass killing is not possible without defining these terms, and we do that in the pursuit of justice. So if we have a term for genocide and if we are able to make it punishable and a crime, then you are able to prosecute it in international courts. You can prosecute it at courts in your own home country. But forgiveness, again, like I said, doesn't just mean crimes, criminals, and courts. It extends beyond this, and it's contextual. Every situation needs to be analyzed through the lens of contextualism to figure out how justice rightly applies to that.
Okay, so is there any universal measurement for justice or how justice works?
Did you say, is there a universal measurement on how this works? Not necessarily. I guess the closest empirical data that I could give you that's reflective of justice is the 92.5% reconciliation. Again, we see that this reconciliation is facilitated through collectivism, yes, but collectively applied justice in the form of, as an example, hate speech laws.
Okay, so in the aftermath of a genocide, how would you measure that justice is effective?
I mean, I guess you would measure it through the examples we really just gave you. First, we give you an example of when it is effective, and you can see societal cohesion through justice, through these laws. But the second, I think, is more important and more powerful, that we give you when justice doesn't work, when it does fail. And then we see continued subjugation of groups that have been subjugated in the past, such as through disenfranchisement, such as through police brutality, specific to the United States, of course.
Oh, okay. So my last question is going to be, you talked about law, so is there any law that forces someone to release feelings of resentfulness or hatred?
Is there any law that requires someone to release feelings of resentment?
Someone because they have not released feelings of resentfulness or hatred?
No, at least not here in the US. Okay.
The question is, do the debaters know what efforts at justice were undertaken in Rwanda after the genocide?
Okay, so we'll start with Rwanda.
What steps towards justice were taken in Rwanda after the genocide?
All right, so I was bringing it in one of my last rebuttals. I was going to include some of the examples, but then I would like to say there is what we call Kachacha, which is mainly a platform that allows people to come forward and ask for forgiveness for their dues. Like, you come forward and say, I'm sorry, I did this and this, and you help in the reconciliation process. There, what the government used to do is that they give you, like, if your punishment was to be in jail for almost 19 years, the government was to reduce your sentence so that you spend the other half helping the society to rebuild. But after the society has allowed to forgive you, to give you the forgiveness that you asked for, and then after your sentencing, which is mainly where you're trained, you're turned into a normal human being, then you come back in the society that has forgiven
you. Okay, if either of you would like to address the topic of steps towards justice that happened in Rwanda after the genocide.
So specifically in the context that Taylor articulates, the Rwandan government tried to enact, at least to date, at least 35 specific individual laws against hate speech and violent, oppressive acts in public. These look like pestering someone in the market fair, or making fun of an individual based on their cultural group because they're trying to limit the specific societal conditions that would allow for another genocide like this to happen. We recognize that this is important because due to the institution of these laws and these 35 practices, that has allowed for the conflict resolution in Rwanda to take place that we see today. Thus, my partner cited the 92.5% statistic.
Second question.
Are there any examples of cases after genocide in which zero justice has been pursued and forgiveness and social cohesion has been achieved? And conversely, like, do we see examples of actual justice being enacted fully, like after we saw the Nuremberg trials?
Could you ask that like a more simple version?
Okay. Do we see examples of full social cohesion and forgiveness without the pursuit of justice? And conversely, is justice realistic? Like, do we have examples of actual justice?
Okay.
Yeah, so we have instances in the United States, I mean, we have hundreds of years of history when we look at this, where justice has been tried to be applied to specific instances of oppression in society. Whether we're talking about arguments of forgiveness after slavery or arguments for forgiveness after police brutality, we see nations and cities all across the United States asking individuals who have lost loved ones in these instances like oppression, okay, well now will you forgive, right? But then when individuals are supposed to be held accountable, we often find that in our society today, justice is not dealt out, individuals are acquitted, and we find that individuals who might have committed mass atrocities are being let go scot-free. So now we're at a kind of a dichotomy here. We either want to go 100% forgiveness, and then we hope that justice comes along and rights the wrongs, or we have to assume that our broken justice system is enough to even facilitate forgiveness. My partner and I are not advocating either of those issues. We're advocating for perfect justice in a world in which specific contexts call for the correct arbitration. In a world in which individuals need to be held accountable for what they're doing, that is when correct justice will be applied.
So I think that the question that she just gave, I first need the House to understand that the way genocide is carried out, it's not someone saying that I'm killing as Mecca. I'm killing as me, but in the name of my people. Genocide happens in a collective manner because you don't kill as an individual, you kill on behalf of your people. And those that survive, they all, I mean, when you do justice, you're handling a small percentage of people because there are those that remain outside of the justice system that you created, who have not contributed to the genocide, but still face the same consequences as a person who committed the genocide, because genocide is done in the name of the people. So the main example maybe in Rwanda, I would like to tell you that after realizing that genocide was done in the name of Hutus, now the best way to do it was to say, we forgive Hutus, but then we will also look at those individuals. But now, because we know that after the genocide, life continues, as she mentioned, that we have to look at a better solution that can hold the society together and avoid future genocides. My name is Mercer. Thank you very much. My name is Mercer, and I'm going to be doing the rebuttal of this debate. It's one of the most hardest jobs that I've ever done in this century, because I believe that the two things that we're talking about are they're the most important things after any genocide. But then the question now remains, which one of those two helps us to have a united society that cannot have genocide to happen again? So, for the House to vote today, and for our judges here to make their decision, they have to look at the side that has provided a better future for any nation that has gone through a genocide. So, they say that one of the laws that can help the country to fight against future genocide, or to also help the genocide does not happen again, is to set laws that fight against hate speech. Still in the dilemma of understanding that the perpetrators don't know even up to now that they have committed a crime, because some of them have a mindset that can allow them to have hate speech. And on the side of survivors, those people are also at the same risk, at the same as perpetrators, to have hate speech, because they also survived, they also recognize they lost their people, they have the anger of committing revenge because they feel like they have lost something important in their lives. Now, the question is, which hate speech are you going to stop, and which hate speech are you going to make sure does not be in public? Because at the end of the day,
What justice does is that it only looks at the perpetrators and holds them accountable. But we're not looking again at the side of survivors who are also at the same risk of having hate speech. So justice cannot solve this. What solves this is forgiveness. Because by survivors to understand that what happened, happened, and to forgive in the name of society, to forgive because they want to live in a better society, can avoid them to have hate speech. And by perpetrators to be forgiven, it helps them to also recognize their dues, because it allows the society to have a conversation, to have social cohesion about the genocide and other crime that has happened in those nations. So I think the argument they're making about the justice that they're supporting, it does not really solve or help the nation not to have hate speech, as they suggested, as forgiveness does. Now, the opposition is assuming that after justice or after genocide, we put a full stop to life. Life does not continue. Because they feel like after we hold perpetrators accountable, then the nation goes back at peace. I want to give my personal story. When I was 10 years old, I visited my grandmother, whose kids, sons, who happened to be my uncles, committed genocide. They had killed people during the genocide. And on the other side, my mom survived the genocide. When I visited my grandmother, she said that if I had a chance to again have genocide to happen again, because my son is in jail and he has been imprisoned for the thing that he did because he was doing us a favor or doing the community a favor, I will collect all Tutsis in my community, put them in one house, and burn them together. What does that mean? It means that after a genocide, the mindset of the people does not change. And after a genocide, because genocide is not a crime that is done individually, people do it in favor of the other. So what forgiveness does, it allows those people to realize that I'm not part of it. It allows those people to realize that they can still be part of a big society, and they can still be part of a big dream that any nation can hold. Justice can encourage more anger because people are not educated of their crimes, but forgiveness can allow those conversations that help people to be educated about their crime to take place and peacefully. But without justice, we can still have another genocide to happen. Now, as a post-genocide generation, when we talk about genocide and people tend to put a full stop on survivors by giving them justice, and on the perpetrators by holding them accountable, I'm like, the biggest part that you're leaving aside is the one that can affect the nation again and in a big consequence. Because if you look at Rwanda, 65% of the population is those ones who were born after the genocide. Now, only considering the perpetrators, you're leaving aside a big percentage of people who can contribute again to a wide and a bigger genocide. But what forgiveness does, it allows those people, as I say it again, it allows those young people like me, like Kelia, whose parents survived the genocide, to have conversation that allows to have peace. But if you put my uncles to jail, if you put Kelia's parents in a favor of understanding that my parents are in jail, you're not allowing me to see the gravity and the magnitude of what my parents did. So, the debate today was mainly to provide a solution, and a long-lasting solution. Not to just put people, hold people accountable, but at the end of the day, if those people are going to come back in societies have not forgiven them, societies are still angry about what they did, societies are still looking at them as killers, society are still thinking of them as people who are coming back to kill them, then you're just providing a solution that is going to work for 1, 2 years, 3 years, but at the end of the day, the society has not healed. And if they're given the same opportunities to commit another genocide, likely enough, they were going to commit it, now a wide and a bad genocide, because now both societies are going to be involved because of the anger. You have not allowed forgiveness to play its role in healing. So, understanding genocide as a collective act, what does this help? They're saying that they hold individuals accountable. But what individuals do you hold accountable if they do everything in the name of a society. Up to today, some people in Germany, in Armenia, in Darfur, everywhere in the world where genocide has occurred, people still suffer the consequences. People still feel the shame of the do's of their parents. All right, I would like to conclude saying that if you look at me like the way you look at my father, then you're making me feel guilty for the rest of my life. But if you allow me to be forgiven and live in a society that has peace, then you're allowing me to be a good citizen who is going to provide long-lasting peace. Thank you.
I'll start now. Well, isn't this exciting? Excellent conversation from both sides about a topic that obviously is pertinent in our society today. I'm going to start this closing rebuttal with a quote. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of being. Whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. If we're going to call for forgiveness, not as individuals, but society, then we're also going to call for justice, not as individuals, but also as society. On this side of the house, we're advocating for justice that not only stretches across nations, but across people groups, across ethnicities, races, belief systems. We are advocating for arbitration in the context in which arbitration is due. Judges, I'm going to contextualize for you every single way that justice is preferable or therefore more important than the affirmative case. First, they said that forgiveness ends revenge killings. They make the argument stating that justice does not change the social or the mental conscience that still harbors, right, the ill will towards other individuals. If you have a system of justice that's going to not only curtail future killings, but also proactively ensure that it never happens and we strip the societal context needed for a genocide to happen, I believe that the opposition just resolved for revenge killings. What I was looking for on side affirmative was how a forgiveness by a collective group of individuals is going to ensure that all individuals within that group was not going to perpetuate killings. They provided no examples to which all individuals actually forgave and then therefore did not perpetrate killings. They also provided no examples to show that individuals that were victims in a specific society even perpetrated revenge killings. So let's look at our first contention, proactive justice. In proactive justice, we analyze ways in which countries, specifically we talk about the UK, Japan, Sweden, Ireland, India, Canada, and Rwanda itself, who have histories of genocide that right after that made sure they took the proactive measures to ensure that genocide was not proliferated yet again in those countries. That means for social cohesion, we saw back for revenge killings. Now let's look at their second contention, which is social cohesion. They pose the questions to the judges, whoever should win the round is the team that proves whether forgiveness or justice is better for the social cohesion of a society. Not only do I believe that we have won, I strongly believe that every individual asks themselves a question. If we're going to collectively call for justice, let's give ourselves an internal look here. If individuals are going around the country, around the world, harming different people groups, always asking for forgiveness, hoping that they were always forgiven, they can always be forgiven. That time shall always come. But when is justice ever going to be enacted? You can't assume that all individuals are going to not only ask forgiveness, release those emotions, and then at the same time operate and conduct themselves in a manner that would ensure that a genocide would never come to be. So let's look at what happens when individuals do not have justice. We get to our second contention of blanket forgiveness. We recognize that in the Civil War, individuals who were the perpetrators of mass crimes to Africans in this country were given forgiveness. Those were actual perps. Those were perpetrators. They were tying and destroying the actual fabric of American society. They were given forgiveness. Those same individuals were allowed to shed their little guilt, now become, as a part of the policy paradigm in America, become congressmen, Supreme Court judges, and now we find ourselves generations after asking the question, where have we gone as a collective society? They said that we must not ask questions on an individual level, but on a collective level. Well, we have given an analysis specifically through my partner's fact that in 2015, right, the Justice Commission in Rwanda found that after the Rwandan government has actually enacted changes for justice, they now have one of the highest reconciliatory rates amongst all developed nations. Developed nations. Individuals who say they already have their stuff built. America, they are already on that level because those governments took the needed steps to ensure that justice was dealt. That has happened across the board with multiple nations. We stop hate speech, right? That is not a one-sided biased lens. It's a universal lens. You are either speaking to put someone down, or even if you are the victim, if you're still hating on another group, hate speech laws catch you also. So now, we are asking the question, who provides for the better social cohesion at the end of the day? Well, in a world that justice ensures that at least right after the genocide, some material change can come about to ensure that in the future, those same atrocities cannot happen again, we now have the basis, the framework, right? The social impetus needed to now forgive. Because if individuals cannot see that there's a change of hand, a change of heart, through the articulation and the implementation of justice through legislation or some sort of retribution, how can we then have full forgiveness? We are arguing that in the question of importance, justice is more important than forgiveness because it is the catalyst for forgiveness to take place. We're not saying forgiveness is not important, but if you truly want to forgive, what is the problem with ensuring that justice is taken into account first? There isn't any. Therefore, we solve for social cohesion. We ensure that the material changes needed to ensure that all individuals can get together happens. We cement that through laws and physical actions, and then we specifically recognize that forgiveness houses the headspace and the latitude to ensure that it comes into play. So we talk about proactive justice. We talk about blanket forgiveness. Justice has now provided for more social cohesion. We specifically recognize it also has the ability to solve back for revenge killings. So if we want to collectively ask ourselves how we should move forward after times of genocide, sure, let's ask for forgiveness. Everyone does that, that's nice. We can look at justice. Justice allows for individuals to have some sort of rights, right, given back to them. Forgiveness can still happen. Remember the quote that Taylor gave you earlier. Forgiveness is a reflection of justice. They walk hand by hand, step by step. They work together. Justice gives forgiveness the mouth through which to speak. We advocate on the opposition side that justice is more important than forgiveness after genocide because justice ensures that forgiveness can take place. For all those reasons, thank you, vote for Mercer.